Good morning, everyone. Really appreciate you joining us for what is part one of a two-part experiment that ICEAA is running here at my urging. Part one is the webinar today, which is designed to bring analysts of all experience levels across a variety of organizations together to talk about a challenge to cost analysts in hopes of us, advancing the state of the art. Part two of the experiment is going to be, continuing this discussion via a platform that MITRE has developed called CostFacts. It's knowledge sharing. There's a discussion area, and I urge you all, as indicated in the ICEAA announcement, to become members of CostFacts. At the close of the day, Dan Harper from MITRE will say a couple quick words about that, but he's made it really, really easy for all of us to do this. Couple administrative notes. Megan Jones from the ICEAA business office, please.
Yes, that's just, everybody's going to be muted until we get to the questions portion, and we'll go in order of the questions that were asked. If you have any side questions or having any difficulty, send me a message in the chat box.
All right, thank you, Megan. And I will tell you, another part of the experiment today is we have no briefing chart, so hold on to your seats. I think you'll all be able to handle it. Practice active listening here. And I would say that if either the audio or the video, and we can't do anything about our faces, but if the video is not clear, feel free to raise your hand, and we can adjust as required. So, very quick introductions. We have from the Motor City, the one panel member who is not sitting here at the table, Dave Holm, who runs the cost and systems analysis group at TACOM outside of Detroit. At the end of the table, in uniform here, is Commander Todd Phillips, who's, as I said in the invite, he's a financial management analyst in budget shop in the Navy that reports directly to the comptroller, the secretariat level. To Todd's right is Bill Seaman, who runs the Space and ICBM Cost Analysis Division at the Air Force Cost Agency. And to Bill's right is Fred Janicki, who runs, I think it's still called the Advanced System Cost Analysis Division, or no?
Close enough.
Close enough. Okay, close enough. He runs one of the three divisions in the cost assessment half, if you will, of OSDK. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Todd to kick us off here.
Okay. Good morning or afternoon, depending where you are. I'm Todd Phillips, and I have been involved with accelerated acquisition in the Navy for the last almost 3 years. As Section 804 came out through the FY16 NDAA, but right around that same time, the Navy was trying to figure out what ways could it accelerate programs, and the names have kind of changed, but you may hear the term ARPED, or Rapid Prototyping Experimentation and Development, under the Accelerated Acquisition Board of Directors, which the Navy has been kind of doing. We have a very small pot of money over the last couple of years, which we can put towards prototyping efforts, and we're largely trying to do kind of the same things that Section 804 now allows us to do. And what's happening over kind of the last 6 months to a year, as OSD has codified the Section 804 guidance, there's been kind of a merging of, and for the Navy, a lot of the same accelerated acquisition programs under the Navy's that Board of Director governance is falling under, are also being designated as middle tier acquisition programs in an effort to go faster. So I think we try to explain it in the Navy to Navy leadership and to the program offices as they're trying to figure out where they can fit in, is that Section 804 kind of gives you the authorities to move through the acquisition process different than the DoD 5000 series instructions. And then the accelerated acquisition nomenclature for the Navy means that you're kind of a priority program within the Navy, and there's significantly more oversight from Navy leadership, which is a good and bad thing. It can definitely help in the prioritization of things, but there's a lot more briefings for those program managers and a lot more kind of homework to do as they attempt to go faster. But really, my background is financial management, so I kind of sit in. I'm involved in these as we try to ensure that programs are properly funded. So I think, and in my previous job, I was a congressional liaison for the Appropriations Committee for the Navy's Budget Office, and it's interesting because there's the one side of Congress, the authorizers who wrote the 804, the language, they clearly support this and want this to happen. And I think the appropriators on the other side of Congress are just weary of kind of what the services are going to do. They want to make sure that the proper oversight still remains, and we're starting to see that kind of dynamic tension in our reporting requirements that we delivered with PB20, which was we had to provide cost estimates, and we had to provide an acquisition strategy and a test approach. So we did work with the committees to change and get away from the test plan, so it's not confused as a temp, because a lot of these things are smaller programs designed to kind of be around for a couple of years, prove that the prototype works or doesn't work, and then move on into a more traditional kind of acquisition program. I think that the reporting requirements will continue for all middle tier Section 804 programs, because I think the appropriators are trying to kind of get a handle and an understanding of exactly what the services are doing. And so for us in the budget shop, a big part of this year was spent trying to figure out are things fully funded, which then requires clearly good cost estimates, which is I think where you will fit in, and we struggled with it, and I think you will struggle with it because it's still kind of unclear exactly how each of the services are implementing this guidance, and we're kind of we're learning as we go, which can make it difficult sometimes. But I think there's definitely an opportunity for some programs to be very successful, and it'll be interesting to see over the next couple of years how, if Congress continues to support it, and how the services kind of implement it. But so far, the Navy has a couple programs that they have designated as Section 804, and those programs are kind of key, key programs to the future Navy success. They are trying to move faster. I think we start to hear that in the Navy now. That's kind of become the buzzword, is accelerate or go faster. The CNO and Secretary Gertz are directing programs all the time to go faster. And so I know the program managers are feeling a lot of pressure in trying to figure out how can they do that. And then we're kind of on the opposite side of that coin to some extent, where we're trying to, in the budget office, trying to make sure, okay, do you have enough money? Can you do this? Can you still do this in the appropriation law? Meaning, because we still have all of the below and above threshold requirements and limitations, and we're trying to kind of figure that out, because a lot of this work is you're trying to move within the normal kind of 2-year budget cycle, and it's very difficult because that structure is not in place. So there's a lot of engagement from the Navy senior leaders with Congress regarding these kind of programs that we're trying to accelerate, and we're marching down, but it's not quite as easy as I think people had hoped. And that's so I'm here if anybody has any questions. I hope to participate. I think I wish you luck as you try to determine how much, and you're going to have to kind of, I guess, come up with different models and different ways to look at things, and we're trying to do that in the financial management side, and we'll see where we end up in the next few years. But thank you for having me.
Hey, Todd, quick question. I mean, one of the reasons that I was excited about having you on the panel is because there is, as I think the other panelists will agree, there tends to be a healthy tension between the cost and the budget communities. In fact, there's a healthy tension between cost and virtually every community.
Yeah,
but The comment you made earlier about tension between the authorizers and the appropriators, can you just comment again on
Sure.
on that?
I mean, so the appropriators, at the end of the day, they care about, they appropriate funds for a specific purpose in a given time for that given amount, and they want to make sure that those dollars are used for that in the time frame, and they really look at it kind of, on a yearly to yearly basis. And if you're not executing the dollars for that time frame, they're not questioning their requirement. They just, their thought is, well, we can market and we can use funds somewhere else, and then they expect that the services will pay back to the programs in the future, which that often does not happen. So the programs don't like it. The authorizers are, it's much more policy. They don't have to balance the budget at the end of the day, so they can kind of think and have bigger thoughts and allow things to happen. I think the appropriators don't want to give up they have the power of the purse, and they don't want to give that up. And if they create and allow, if there's lots of large pots of money and we can transfer funds between programs, then we're essentially taking Congress out of that equation, and they feel like it weakens their role overall. They're willing to work with us, and so I don't want, it's not so black and white, but they definitely don't want to just give up their kind of blanket control or blanket authority to something, where the authorizers don't have that same control, so they're willing to kind of look at, and it started a few years ago, right? The big focus was acquisition reform and trying to make things better, and I don't think people would argue that there's not places to reform acquisition. I think the appropriators would agree with that. They just are still they're tied to the budget cycle and process, and so I think the changes that we do, we have to kind of work in concert with that. I kind of use the analogy of, currently our speed limit is 55 miles an hour with programming. We want to go 100 miles an hour, but the appropriators they're like, how about you do about 75? So they're willing to let us go faster, but they're definitely not, it's definitely not, hey, you can go just, there's no speed limit, go do whatever you want. Because they want to make sure at the end of the day that we don't waste taxpayer dollars. I mean, I think there's definitely, in some of this, as we figure these processes out, maybe we can resolve some of this, but initially, to go faster, you have to skip something. So what are you skipping, or what are you giving up, or what are you not doing? And it tends to be test events. One of the big focuses this year for the Navy's, we now call them Maritime Accelerated Acquisition Programs, the reporting requirement was we had to consult with DOT&E. Different than DOT&E they're not giving us a temp for the programs, but there has to be a consultation, and my belief is the committees wanted DOT's involvement because they wanted somebody outside of the Navy, an impartial kind of look, to make sure that we didn't skip something that we shouldn't, and then which will then cause us to then get to the end and realize, oh wait, we should have done this 5 steps ago, we should have done this test event, and we would have known then, but now we've invested all this money, and then now the service is like, starts to kind of feed more money into it because I'm already so far down this road, and now I want to continue down. So they're weary of that. They look at past history, and we don't always have the best track record with some of this stuff. So.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Todd. Unless other panelists have a follow-up to something Todd said, I think we'll move next to an Air Force perspective, Bill Seaman, and then Dave, you can follow with the Army, and then Fred will follow from the OSD point of view. So, Bill, over to you.
Hi, fantastic. So what I want to do is give you a case study in 10 minutes. This is a case study we actually briefed at AFIT, Air Force Institute of Technology, about a month and a half ago. Took about an hour and 20 minutes. But I'm going to try and do it in 10, super quick. And the program I want to talk about is a program called Next Generation OPIR, Overhead Persistent Infrared. And it's a space program, replaces a program called SBIRS. And the mission generally of this program is for strategic missile warning. Basically meaning people will say, this is what will probably wake the president up in the middle of the night, hopefully really, really bad things happen because people have launched missiles. So pretty important program. And so next generation, and really why they want to replace SBIRS, just so you know, if you're following the news in space, becoming a, contested environment is what they say, meaning our assets up there aren't really, as safe as they have been, and so we need more survivable type systems. So next generation OPIR went to our service acquisition executive, Dr. Roper, last summer, and he made it either the first or the second, I'm not 100% sure, 804 rapid prototyping program in the Air Force. And I think Fred will talk a little bit more about this, but Dr. Roper, the Air Force SAE, is a huge advocate of 804. Just within white world space, I can tell you, I think I've got 7 804 programs. And who knows how many are throughout the rest of the Air Force. So, so he gave that program a goal or objective. That's what it says in 804. It must have an objective of fielding a something with residual operational capability within 5 years. So he said, I want this program to have a goal of launching the first satellite in FY23. And just so you know, the first SBIRS took 15 years from the time they started to the time they launched the first one. Pretty long. So 5 years is very aggressive. Our estimates, our independent schedule estimates would more indicate, 8-ish type years, maybe for a program like this. 8 or 9 probably. So 5 years is very aggressive. And so what we did was we began to put together some cost estimates indicating the amount of money needed in the early years to reach this FY23 launch goal was more than anyone could stomach, basically. So they moved the launch date back to FY25, still very aggressive, and still in a Section 804 program. So, as cost analysts, we got to decide, okay, what estimates do we do? Who do we provide them to, and for what purpose? Sometimes that's really kind of told to you, but in this case, 804 is, again, all new, and we are part of that really kind of decision process. So what we did was we first did an estimate to roughly this 8-year schedule, or 8 or 9 year schedule that I'm talking about. But remember, that estimate and costs don't reflect the acquisition strategy of this program. So that it was really kind of our internal starting point. We then said, okay, let's, we need to tell the Air Force what it will cost to try to execute to this more aggressive schedule. And so how do you do that, right, in cost? So you could just take your old estimate and kind of scrunch it all up, and the balloon gets bigger up here, and say that's our estimate. But we tried to take a more analytical approach. So what we developed were what we call compression techniques, okay? And so two of the areas I want to kind of talk just a little bit about were software and CFPM. And so what we did was...
You said SCPM?
Yes.
Okay.
CFPM, in
okay.
space we call it CFPM, and includes integration and test.
Oh, God.
But basically, yeah,
Okay.
systems engineering, program management, and software. So for software, we were able to collect data on space systems and the ground portion of the space programs, which is also very costly. And the ground section, just so you know, basically does the command and control of the satellites and constellation, does your mission data processing. And even just like on OPIR, that's $400 million, so that's big bucks. So anyway, what we did was we were able to collect data and come up with techniques to say, look, if you try to write, so much code in a much shorter time frame, you're going to need to add people, makes sense, but we did all this analytically and with data. And the efficiency, if you will, of those people will go down. Okay, so as an example, if you have 50 people writing software for 100 months, that gives you 5,000 equivalent man months. And so what happens if you compress that down to 50 months? Do you take that up to 100 people and get your same 5,000 answer? Well, we were able to develop analysis and equations that basically gives you like a 37% penalty. So in other words, you go not from 50 to 100, you go from 50 to 137. And that's just kind of an example. So anyway, we applied that when we compressed the schedule. And then we also looked at CPM or CPM and said, okay, so what happens there? Instead of just having 8 years of CPM, do you have 5? And do you save a whole bunch of money from that? Or is CPM a little more complicated than that, right? And CPM may have a part to it that is basically LOE driven, and a part to it that is what I'll call requirements driven, meaning, hey, kind of no matter what the schedule is, you gotta do it. And so we actually were able to try to break CPM down, not really even so much we tried to kind of break it down between those two, and then separately apply some of these compression techniques to each side of that equation. So it gets pretty complicated kind of quickly. And so some of this, I guess the point of what I'm saying is, I think as we start looking at costs of compressed schedules, I think the cost community obviously needs to start looking into, or more so looking into, what are the impacts on the elements of cost if you try to go fast, okay? And then, for instance, like we also added extra sparing costs, et cetera, kind of thinking you can't afford time for rework and you're trying to go fast. You got to have more spares on site in development and some things like that. So we did the estimate, time phased it to a successful go fast program with, like I said, a FY25 launch. But that really isn't what we in the cost community think will happen. We still think that's aggressive, okay? And again, even with that schedule, it requires more money up front. So you've got really kind of a higher peak in your costs, you could say, than if you had done a kind of a mean estimate at about 8 years. So we are currently in the process of developing yet a third kind of estimate on this program. And that estimate is our ICE. And that is what we think will really happen. And what we think will really happen, we're still in the process of this, is that they're going to try to go fast. If they get the funding, kind of big ifs, but if they get the funding, they will ramp up and try to go fast, and let's say not make their still aggressive schedule goals. So what happens then, right? Do you now have a higher staff that needs to be sustained over, let's say, the original 8-year kind of mean schedule? Or do we say, well, they tried to go fast, couldn't make 5 or 6 years, but they still came in at 7, and make that our ICE. And that really is what we are in the process of doing, in the process of considering for the program. And that is about what I have on OPIR. we will see, again, early, going fast. I think Dr. Roper certainly got on board with it very early on a lot of programs. I think, the cost guys are coming in going, okay, we can do estimates for that, but, the early cost that drives is also something that, needs to be considered when trying to go fast.
Thanks. Thanks, Bill. I got a follow up too. So you specifically asked or commented on here. Let me zoom back out here to the risk. All right. For those of you playing the home version of this game, please bear with me. I'm bad with this remote control. All right. Anyway, so you commented specifically on your approach to doing software and system integration and SEPM and integration. And to me, it sounded like it was you called it a compression technique. It sounds like it's a schedule penalty, if you will, in some
right.
sense
Normally
there.
people think of schedule penalty though of overrunning schedule. Right?
Yeah.
And we tried to say, okay, if you execute and do go fast, yeah, you can expect.
Right.
Right.
So
kind of an inefficiency penalty.
So my question, as I try to zoom out here, is relative to test costs, right? Since a big part of this is eliminating or reducing tests, number of tests, time of tests. I mean, how did you handle that, or is space just a whole different wicket when it comes to tests?
Yeah, so that was one of the things we have asked. What are you doing different, to try and get to this accelerated schedule? And nobody has told us they are looking at eliminating tests. Okay, so that there's no, there may be more concurrency. They may have more, in the go fast schedule, I'm sure it assumes more of a kind of a green light test schedule where you find less, you have to repeat tests less often, you find less defects, et cetera, et cetera.
But Bill's program, the OPIR, can't fail. So it really is more like an ACAT 1D program than an 804 where you can take that risk.
Right.
So if I'm building a new motor for the SM6, and it's a prototype, you'll take risk. You'll maybe do less tests, but not for this, because this can't fail. You can't have this system not doing its job because we didn't do all the tests that it should have. Okay. So this is kind of a unique example of a program that really, frankly, shouldn't even be an 804. And so I think from a content standpoint, all the content is there. Yeah. They just stuffed it in a 5-year schedule. Okay. And then the challenge for Bill's team and my team as well is that how do you help the decision maker understand where the real risks are with that schedule and how it's going to grow, and then what are those budget implications and the funding implications and the inefficiencies that you're going to basically put on this program. Right. Now you'll save some things, when you look at a fixed variable, I'll say function like CPM, there may be a little bit of savings there, but then you'll also hit diminishing returns like on software because you're trying to do so much code in a 5-year period of time. Right. And so by throwing more bodies on it to get it done, you hit diminishing returns. Right. And I think that's what Bill, when he was analyzing that 37% represented, we took a little bit different tack, but basically came up with approximately about the same kind of penalty on those things that, once again, that typically take 10 years and you basically have the schedule. At the end of the day, the content still has to get done, right? And so when you do that, it's going to put a lot of pressure on the system, both from a budgeting standpoint, because now you have all those resources that were supposed to be over 10 years, now over 5. So it's an affordability issue, right. As well as because we're going fast, you don't have the 2 years that you typically have in a typical ACAT 1 program to go through the AOA and start the 2-year budgeting process, which also means on OPIR, they had to go get an ATR, or still trying to get an ATR above threshold reprogramming in 19 for approximately $600 million. So you look at,
Yeah,
okay,
so-
it's got to come within the Air Force resources. Where are they going to go find $500 million plus
Right.
in 19, right? So it's a challenge.
Okay. Well, to me, it begs the question. I mean, you said OPIR shouldn't be a N804. Are you seeing other programs that you've drawn the same
Actually, I
conclusion on?
think Dave will probably talk about the program I would bring up, OMFV. But when we look at it, we really think there's only really two programs that don't belong in 804. OPIR and OMFV, but I don't want to steal Dave's thunder.
All right. Well, that sounds like a perfect segue to the Motor City. So, Dave, you're up.
Okay. Hi, guys. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. So for those of you on the phone that don't know me, I'm Dave Holm. I'm the Director of Custom Systems at U.S. Army Tank Automotive Command in Warren, Michigan. And so we're one of the Army system commands, and our expertise is in the ground vehicle world. And so before I got into the specifics, I wanted to take about a minute or two to kind of talk about the changes organizationally within the Army that really is part of what's going on as we get to this 804, because it also lends itself to some of the complexities that the cost estimators are having to deal with. So I'm sure most of you have not heard about the Army standing up the new 4-star command called the Army's Futures Command, and that was officially stood up last year, and they are located in Austin, Texas. And it was designed to handle all the modernization activities in the Army. So the Chief of Staff of the Army had somebody to point to directly when he had questions on the modernization questions that he might have had. And so with that, it realigned some of the activities that were from the Army Material Command and the TRADOC. So some of the other 4-star commands gave up some organizations that fell under this Army Futures Command reporting structure. And one of the biggest things was the science and technology community left the Army Material Command and then went to this Army's Futures Command. And underneath this Army's Futures Command, they've stood up a number of these cross-functional teams that they're called, and it's supposed to have expertise in all the functional disciplines. And the idea is to help speed things through from requirements generation all the way through the normal acquisition process. So you've got some experts in all the different disciplines. And they're basically aligned to the major modernization programs that have been called out and prioritized within the Army. And so the two of them that my folks deal with from the ground vehicle world is, in the first priority is the long precision fires, which is the extended range cannon. That's one program. And then the next one is the next generation combat vehicle cross-functional team. And under that one, the Army has placed 4 different programs under that cross-functional team. And so this 4-star command basically has this cross-functional team, and this next generation combat vehicle, CFT, is located in Warren, Michigan, right at TACOM, right on the Arsenal, which is a good thing because they're working with the acquisition side of the house, the ASALT folks in the Army that are the program executive offices. And so the program executive office for ground combat systems and combat service support have some of those vehicle programs that are under the next generation combat vehicle. So as they were doing this to align this under the modernization activities, some of the programs that they've aligned under this cross-functional team are in various stages. So they put JLTV, which has already been through Milestone C, LRIP, and they're kicking off their full rate production decision sometime next month. And then there's mobile protected firepower, and then there's the Army multi-purpose vehicle. So all 3 of those programs were moving already through the old 5000 acquisition and have come under this cross-functional team to be managed under this Army's Futures Command. So all of those programs there were doing their documentation that they normally would have done under the 5000 series. So then this other new program that they were looking to replace the Bradley vehicle is called the Optionally Manned Fighting Vehicle. And the idea behind that one was that they could use this 804 capability to try and speed up and get with the Army's leadership, wanting to get something out there to replace the Bradley as soon as possible. So this 804 authority really came at the, I guess the timing was right to put that one, request permission for that one. The other program that has truly the 804 authority is the Mobile Protected Firepower. They really were going to a milestone B. They had all the documentation, and the 804 authority came out, and it seemed like, because they were going to be building prototypes, that might be a good one to put in there just to kind of test out some of the 804 processes and things like that. So that is also the other 804 program. So the two programs that I'm really going to talk to and give you kind of a cost estimator, somebody on the ground, and some of the challenges that we've faced are the Mobile Protected Firepower and the Optionally Manned Fighting Vehicle, or the Bradley replacement. And so both of those programs are kind of different in the sense that one had quite a bit of documentation, because as I said, they were going to the milestone B before they got 804, but so they had pretty much done most of their documentation, if not all of it. So they were pretty well far along. Whereas the Optionally Manned Fighting Vehicle was not. That was definitely, I guess if you want to call it, starting off from scratch, and it really highlighted some of the issues for the cost analyst that they had to deal with. So, and normally in the milestone acquisition process, you've got other documents that the cost analyst uses to obtain their information. And in this case, it was very difficult for the cost analyst to try to get what were the requirements, because it was not following the normal JSIDS process. The Army leadership really was kind of doing a different approach, in that they were going out to industry and saying, hey, these are kind of top level things that we're looking for in the next generation vehicle for that would do the Bradley mission. What kinds of things are you guys working on? And they kind of did this market research and a lot of industry engagement. And so it was really a back and forth through a number of engagements, how the requirements materialized. And it kept getting, and there were big changes throughout that. And the problem for the cost analysts is that they were big changes in some of these technologies that we had never had any data on. For instance, one of the things was they wanted to go for, there's a big thing in the Army to go to more lethality. And so they wanted a bigger gun than what was currently on the Bradley. And they had there were some vendors out there that were working on a 50 millimeter gun as opposed to a 30 millimeter or a 25 millimeter gun, which is currently on the Bradley. And so there was a big push, like, oh, we want this 50 millimeter because we want leap ahead. Well, we don't have any data on what is that and who's got it and all that. And they were wanting estimates to go along with these 5-year schedules that for anything that hadn't been built yet. And our historical data for all our programs to date had much longer schedules for any of this. And so we really were at a loss in some of the things that Bill was talking about, and trying to say, well, where in your schedule are you going to be able to compress, and how are you doing that? And, it was don't bother me the details, just this is what we're going to do. And the costers were having to continuously put in the realism back to the program leadership to say, no, you got to have something so we can really try to cost this out, because it's unexecutable. It was really unrealistic. And the problem was there were so many of these courses of actions for these schedules turns. It really put a lot of pressure on the cost team to try to come up with something that we felt we could stand behind, but yet kind of get that balance of what was truly unrealistic or unexecutable, because they were bringing in so many new technologies. We didn't even know if the technologies were ready, like a TRL-7, and were they ready to be integrated, or was this, how was this all going to unfold? And so the next thing that we were trying to do was, in the areas that usually take up a lot of time, was testing and contracting. Contracting takes a lot of time to put this stuff out there in the RFP world. And I mean, to me, if they're not checking their processes and seeing how they can speed things up, especially in the testing and contracting worlds, it's going to be pretty difficult to get any of these 5-year schedules. I think, some of the things that I heard from Bill was concurrency, and I think the Army is also talking about having the vendors come in with bid samples on this obviously manned fighting vehicle as part of their bid for the source selection. So that was how they were going to reduce risk, because then they were going to count on industry to do all that integration and come in with a prototype that was pretty much built and then could be taken off and tested as part of the source selection. So that was kind of the way that they strategized to help reduce some of that risk up front, but yet, trying to convey what was beyond, the basic requirements, the threshold and objective was really a churning process that was going big sways in terms of one direction or the other for, several months, which made it very difficult on the cost analyst. The other factor that really came into play was that some of these efforts, because this says optionally manned, so the idea is autonomy. And so where was this thing, how far along was the industry in terms of autonomy? We see that cars are out there driving, in California in some capacity now, being, tested or limited user right now. But where we, it's a lot different on a road than in a train that the military normally fights in. And so there's a lot more work that needs to be done there. And so how is that all going to be brought into this? And so the S&T community was also undertaking efforts to look at how to build these test beds and these test demonstrators for controllers and then these robotic type vehicles. And this was all going on in the S&T community, unbeknownst to how they were developing their estimates and programs. They weren't sharing that information with the cost community. It was very difficult to get that and any of that information. And so that was going on, and you say, okay, now how is this all going to fold into the major program and through, they're saying increment 1, increment 2 and stuff, but how do you cost that out? When is this all going to be? Somebody's got to put that together in a kind of an overarching plan so it can be costed out. So there was a lot of churning going on in a lot of different areas. And so you've got one reporting chain that's going up to the Futures Command that has their ideals of what needs to be done, which is minimal because, hey, we got the authority. We don't need to do any of this stuff in 5,000. And you've got the acquisition community that's been used to doing it one way, saying, no, you've got to do this. And it's kind of the organizational challenges that we're trying to, what's the way that they're going to work together to try to make this happen? And then the other thing is that we wanted to know right from the get-go was the cost reporting. We wanted to make sure we got cost reporting on these contracts that we were going to go out because some of this data, like I said, we didn't have data on some of these new technologies. And so luckily we already had mechanisms in place and we were going to try to get it at least on the OMFD. And then Kate came out and with the policy they gave us that last final push to say, yes, we need to put this on there. So we'd already done upfront planning to get like CSDRs on those contracts that are going to be awarded. But the S&T community is a different animal because they're not used to going into acquisition. And nobody's checking their numbers. Nobody's really following what their programs are. They're kind of like the science fairs. And so it's much more challenging to get them to agree to put any type of cost reporting, even if it's not full-fledged costing data. It could be just the basics, and just so we get something, because they're looking at it that we're using OTAs. We don't need to other transactional agreements for the contractual mechanism as opposed to the FAR-based contract. So a lot of challenges there. But I think the good thing that we've done is that we engaged DASA-CE, our Army Service Center, to go through their normal cost review board process. We did that with OMFV, and we did that obviously with MPF and JLTV because they were going through the 5,000. But we wanted to get another set of eyes to look at it to say, can we at least get the service to come up with, use that process did we miss anything as we were doing, because we were doing these estimates so fast that we wanted to get another set of eyes on it. And because that was 2804, and it really had to overcome the CFT leadership because they were saying, why do we have to do this? And, there was no policy requiring that we had to do this. And it was really about saying, no, this is the right thing. So the Army has some, at least has another set of rigor of process that has gone through these numbers. And so so we did do that. We have this draft cost position that we're going to inform that's informing the budget, and we're going to refine it when the proposals come in later in the summer, once we see what industry is going to come back with. But I would say from a cost estimating perspective, the emphasis is on speed in the programs to develop these unrealistic and executable program schedules, which is obviously going to increase program risks. And how do you capture that? The Army, we really haven't looked at schedule risks very well in our estimates, and this is a big one. That where are those points where you can take risk, and how is that dollarized, like Fred was talking about, and aligning that with the budget, and because there's going to be, if it doesn't execute, how are you going to get there and do those fixes, and how are you going to mitigate that? Yeah, so I'll end it at that.
So I think, you know, in the interest of time, if you had a closing comment, that'd be great. Otherwise, I think we're gonna move on to.
No, I'm good. Yep.
All right. Sorry for jumping in there, but.
Yeah, no problem. Nope, I was just finishing up.
All right.
Yeah. So Dave, following up on OMFV. So I previously said there were two programs that I didn't think, or Kate doesn't think, belong in the 804 acquisition pathway. One is OPIR because it can't fail. So
right.
That's the reason why OPR shouldn't be, as well as its size. But for OMFV, it is strictly size, right? So that's a program that's approximately $3 billion in RDT&E development.
Yes.
$50 billion in acquisition or procurement, and it's like $200 billion in O&S. And if it was an ACAT 1 program, those are all considered as part of the affordability and estimating process, and it's discussed at length within Army and, frankly, OSD, right? So without that framework, how do you see this playing out in the Army from an affordability standpoint?
Yeah, so that's a great point, because right now the Army's been killing a lot of programs through this night court process to help push money in there. And I argue, and Mr. Barth at the Army, DASA-CE has also argued, is, you know, we got some of these estimates, especially coming out of the S&T community for these big efforts, and nobody's looking at it. And are we killing these programs appropriately? I mean, we don't even know what's really behind that. And so, to me, there needs to be, on these type of dollar programs, in my opinion, I think there needs to be the oversight on there, because it is a lot of dollars, and it's a big portion of the Army's modernization budget. I mean, at the end of the day, for the ground vehicle, it's almost like they're putting all their eggs in one basket, because they're taking money from other programs like JLTV and stuff that are in production to help fund these efforts. And that's, to me, it's a big risk on the Army that they're putting all these dollars in there, and we don't have a lot of, I guess, oversight per se that's ensuring that we're properly, we've got all our ducks in a row to make sure that we're spending those dollars wisely.
Great. Yeah, that's good insight. Thanks, Dave. I want to leave some time for questions, but I do want to just say a few things that I've witnessed in my position at OSD. The first is, if just basic stuff. You read the NDS, and the main theme out of that is the threat is advancing faster than we are. So speed in the acquisition world is really important. It's whatever discipline you're in within the department, it's clear that you know, speed is important. And so the question is how much risk do you take to get that speed, and what is that balancing act? And so the department and the services, but the department writ large is really trying to figure out a way to govern the 804 process that keeps the programs that we need to take risk on. For example, like hypersonics for the Air Force. They have two programs that are in 804 that, frankly, speed is everything, but it can fail, not like OPIR, which can't fail, right? So there are programs that really do belong in that mid-tier acquisition pathway. The other theme that I constantly hear from the services and some of the senior meetings that I attend is the 804 gets them out of doing a couple things that they think are truly time consuming. The first is it gets them out of the JSIDS process. And by pulling out of that process, they believe, and I've heard this from Mr. Gertz and Dr. Roper, that's 2 years of schedule savings on a typical ACAP program. The second is the list of statute that's required as the things that you have to do for an ACAT 1 program. So your Klinger-Cohen compliance and your ACT strategy and your temp, and I have a long list of things right here that it, quote, gets you out of. And their contention as well is that takes a lot of time. Now, the question that our leadership has, as well as Secretary Gertz as well, is asking the question is, do they not have the authority to waive a lot of those things anyways? Can we still use the 5,000 process to get the speed we need without throwing away all discipline and the challenges that we've talked about in the budgeting and the requirements process at some level, as well as the overall baselining process and the affordability processes the department uses to make sure we can afford all the things that we want to do, once again, to meet the threat. So I'm going to basically wrap it up there so we can at least leave 6 or 5 minutes for questions, and I'll turn it back over to you, Rick.
All right, well, we'll get to the questions in a second, but I got one question for you. I mean, if you've had a single piece of advice for the cost analysts who are feeling challenged here, I mean, I think we heard some interesting stuff from Bill about some very specific approaches that they've attempted, to deal with the challenge. Do you have anything to offer, understanding that we are really early here?
I see a big challenge for the cost community, no matter where you sit, whether you're in industry, whether you're a government analyst or you're a contractor supporting government analysis. The bottom line is everybody, wherever you sit, the program managers, wherever you are, they're all going to want to go fast. And they're going to want to ignore the challenges that we as cost analysts have seen in those historical data that we estimate from the foundation of the analysis that we complete. And so at some level, we have a job of tempering the optimism. But the key, my suggestion is, and what we've been trying to do over in CAPE, is bring the data. So when we're talking about the schedule analysis that Bill had done on OPIR, bring all of the data on schedule analyses of what it took to do various satellites, both in development and production, and show that to the decision makers to temper some of their optimism, as well as point out areas that maybe they can cut corners. And as well as one of our jobs, the additional duties that we're going to have with this 804 process is being able to suggest knee in a curve kind of things for reducing both requirements as well as maybe some content that will save schedule and be able to pull those schedules in as much as possible, but informed by history that at some level are still not too optimistic, that they have some realism. So once again, the key is getting that data in front of the decision makers, and I think we can lead and play a powerful role of how we actually do go fast, because we have a lot of that detailed knowledge of these historical systems, and in fact know it better than some of the acquisition professionals on the program management side.
All right, thank you, Fred. So for those of you who are still on the line, we're probably going to run over a little bit here to try to handle as many of these questions as we can. I think, panel, can you stick a little bit beyond one? So the line will continue to be open. So, all right.
So
Megan.
First up, we have Herb Hayes with a bunch of questions. So Herb, you are unmuted. Go for it.
Well, I had a question in regards to the fact that I was on the MEADS program, International Cooperative Program. I was with the Patriot Missile Program, which has a system of systems, which complicates the program when you have to integrate radars and so forth, along with the missiles and so forth. And now OTA coming in, 804 coming in and saying, okay, well, you're going to have piecemeal. It's going to be harder to get costs, just like the other Army fellow mentioned, that trying to get the cost data. So what are we doing to better integrate the individual agencies and services with cost sharing and methodology information? For instance, I'm in the area with NASA, with NDAA, and of course with the Army. So, and now the FBI is coming in. So what are we doing to interagency coordination to help us expedite costing?
Well, Herb, you bring up a challenge that's existed for years and years and years. I mean, to be blunt, I don't see the Section 804 initiative, leading people to better sharing of information now. So now that doesn't mean we shouldn't. All right.
I think that challenge that you bring up is a challenge, whether it's in the 804 acquisition pathway or any
Correct.
pathway. And so we need to improve that, because I'll tell you where I sit, we haven't done enough to share that information across not the department, but the whole government. So point taken. But going back to from a, I'll say, data collection standpoint, specifically for contracts, the CAPE implemented 804 cost collection data policy so that we actually can collect CCDRs on these 804 programs, which I think going forward will be very important. And I'm happy to talk to you on that initiative, Herb, whenever you have time after this.
And I think the contractual limits are the same as non-804.
Yes.
So really basically is saying, as I read it, you don't get out of data collection because you become 804 and the same contractual limits.
So
et cetera.
unlike past iterations of acquisition reform where they were quick to get rid of reporting, we fought the good fight.
And that was, a helpful CAPE memo to their policy. I don't like to say that too often. Sit next to Fred, they can be up. No, that was extreme, because as a cost analyst, you're constantly fighting for data.
But that's not
nice
to mean,
get that out. Yes.
but that's not to mean it's not without challenges, because of the OTA, the other transaction authorities that you brought up and then Dave brought up as well. So when you have industry ponying up half of the development in some cases, getting insight onto things that they're doing on IR&D isn't always easy, because they don't have to give us cost data on that. It's on their own nickel. And so when you're collecting cost data, there's going to have to be some innovative things that we do as analysts and working with our program manager counterparts to make sure we have insight into the industry side of those OTA contracts.
Well, I mentioned earlier the MEADS program was a work share, cost share. We had no insight into cost for the international community.
Yeah, and then that's going to be the challenge going forward.
Okay. All right.
We're good? Okay. So coming up next, we've got Jennifer Kirchhoffer. And Jennifer, you are unmuted. Please go for it.
Great, thank you. This question's for Bill and Dave, and it's regarding schedules. I'm wondering whether schedules were provided to your cost estimators or whether your analysts had to take time to build the schedules. And then as an impact of that in the future, do you see more of an integration between the cost estimate and the schedules along the path that NASA has gone with joint confidence levels?
So with us, on the way we normally do an estimate is we're given a schedule, but we do our own independent schedule estimate at a fairly high level. We're not getting down to what schedulers would do to actually execute a program, but like we hear all the time, oh, I'm going to do satellite programs for, deliver them in 6 years. And we always come back and go, it's a normal thing for us. So the difference in this case is that, we had done the estimate at our kind of independent schedule and then also did a constrained estimate to the schedule that was given to us. And that schedule, I don't know. I mean, it was in some detail, but not like, what a scheduler would put together to actually execute a program, more of what would be shown as part of an acquisition strategy type schedule. So again, we did the estimate both with a schedule given to us as well as kind of an independent schedule. And then now, like I say, I'm trying to struggle with doing an estimate for kind of starting off on that schedule that's given to us, but how we think it'll really end up playing out. Probably, longer than that. I don't know if that partially answers it.
It did, thank you.
Does that help?
Yeah.
It did. It sounded like you're building a schedule-informed cost estimate rather than an integrated cost and schedule estimate.
Well, I mean, I would say our cost and schedule, they're not independent of each other, cost and schedule in our estimates. I can tell you we don't use that joint cost schedule risk process that NASA has or whoever it has. I mean, I've seen that. That's not what we use, but our costs and schedule are tied together in our estimates.
Perfect. Thank you.
Let's go to Dan. Talk about. We had a few questions that came up during the webinar, but those folks had to leave, and I got an email of one because somebody wasn't able to ask it online. So I think we should go to Dan Harper to talk about where we can keep asking more of these questions.
All right, because I can't read. I can't read those questions. I need a camera, microscope.
Dan, you're on.
All right, so we're gonna close out here. Again, I thank everyone who's been on the line here, and I would like to close with Dan Harper from MITRE, just kind of reinforcing this joint cost back so we can continue the discussion, and we are going to share the recording of this. Fortunately for you, not the video, but the vocal. So Dan, over to you.
Yeah, great. Thanks. You guys can hear me okay, right?
Yep.
Beautiful. As you were talking, a lot of questions came up about how costers can share information, and that's one of the things about CostFacts is it's a forum for us to dialogue like this after the meeting, because I've already written down a dozen questions that have come to mind as it relates to cost. So this has been great. Obviously, an hour isn't enough time. So anybody on the line, if you just email me at djharper@mitre.org, we'll get you signed up, and we can kind of continue this discussion. There's a special group to discuss all these questions, and I want to make sure I also have all the gentlemen on the panel signed up as well, because I'm sure they'll be the ones probably most suited to answer them. Although, we can definitely learn from each other. So, yeah. So thanks a lot. I won't take up any more of your time. I know we're running a little bit long, but just email me at djharper.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I mean, Dan's made it easy for each of us by simply just emailing him. You don't have to go through the process online to get yourself registered. And we will put this recording will be available via CostFacts. So there weren't briefing slides.
It'll also be on the ICEAA YouTube page.
It will also be on the ICEAA YouTube page. Oh God.
All right.
All right, so thanks again, everyone, for participating. Oh, perfect. All right, well, yeah, by the way, just learned that both Bill and Fred will be at ICEAA this year at the conference. So if you're there, be sure to point them out to you, or you can find them yourselves. So thanks, and look forward to any feedback you can provide, because again, this is an experiment. I'd like to do something like this on a quarterly basis on, again, topics of interest, challenges for our community. So thanks, and have a great afternoon.